The Ed Sullivan Show was one of the most popular shows of the mid-20th century. It enjoyed consistently high ratings and a devoted fan base during its tenure on TV that spanned 24 seasons and racked up a total of 1,068 episodes. Even though The Ed Sullivan Show hasn't been on the air since 1971, it's still worth taking a closer look at it. After all, it had a major impact on advancing culture and the music industry. Careers and legacies were launched from its stage. Let's take a peek once again at one of the great gone but not forgotten shows of yesteryear. There are certainly some things you never knew about The Ed Sullivan Show that you would be absolutely shocked to discover. So let's get down and dirty with one of the most iconic variety shows of all time. Facts First presents 16 shocking facts on The Ed Sullivan Show. Before we hop back in the old time machine and do some sleuthy detective work, make sure you remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Tap the bell icon to turn on notifications so you can stay up to date with all our fascinating, fact-filled content. Make sure you stick around for the whole video. You wouldn't want to miss the one about the time Ed Sullivan violently attacked one of his rivals in a Manhattan nightclub, would you? Stay tuned for all the eyebrow-raising details, but first, the original title for the show wasn't The Ed Sullivan Show. When the show first debuted in 1948, Ed Sullivan wasn't very well known, so they titled the show Toast of the Town. Soon after its debut, the show had already developed quite a following, and Ed had begun to make a name for himself. So much so, in fact, many people started referring to the show as simply The Ed Sullivan Show. Producers liked the way that sounded. It had a certain ring to it, so they swapped the name out, and the rest is history. Ed was a bit socially awkward. And that's one reason audiences loved him. We can relate to awkward. It's actually refreshing to see someone every now and then that's human like us. He was kind of shifty, prone to nervousness, forgetful, and often flubbed his lines, but none of that mattered to critics or viewers. It was this unique presentation, in opposition to the confident and charming frontmen we were used to seeing on TV, that made us keep coming back every Sunday evening for more. He helped launch many music legends. It was almost uncanny how Ed Sullivan was able to predict who would be superstars. It's almost like he had a crystal ball or something, because week after week, he would have acts on his show that would prove to bring with them the breakout performances that would catapult their acts into the global spotlight. Ever hear of a little band called the Beatles? What about the Rolling Stones or the Doors? And then there was Elvis Presley, Bob Dylan, and the Beach Boys, all of whom paid very significant visits to Ed Sullivan's stage and got major boosts to their blossoming careers. The show saw 4 different decades. Most shows are fortunate if they see more than a couple of seasons, but The Ed Sullivan Show was lucky enough to see 24 seasons over a 23-year period. During that run, the show got to see every decade from the late 40s all the way to the 70s. What a time to be on the air. The world saw some significant changes in those years, and Ed was there for all of it. 38% of the U.S. population saw the Beatles premiere. One of the most significant musical premieres to ever be featured on The Ed Sullivan Show was the Beatles' performance in 1964. Musical historians pinpoint this event as being the birth of Beatlemania and one of the most significant highlights of what would be deemed the British invasion. When the Beatles took the world by storm on that now famous episode, they played before an audience of 74 million people. The U.S. population was 191 million at the time, so more than a third of the country got a taste of what those mop tops had to offer. It aired over 1,000 episodes. In fact, it aired 1,068 full episodes. At an hour apiece, it would take you 44.5 days to watch every episode without taking a break or sleeping. Even The Simpsons, which is often billed as one of the longest-running shows on television, has only accumulated 639 to date. Ed died of an aggressive form of cancer. Ed was a good man. He had a heart of gold and a great sense of humor. Few people had negative words to say about him. That's what made his passing all the harder to reconcile with. He was diagnosed with esophageal cancer in September of 1974, and only 1 month later, he lost the fight to the debilitating and aggressive disease. He was 73 years old when he succumbed to the reality of his illness. Rest in peace, Ed. You were truly one of the greats. He had several recurring acts. Despite the fact he had hundreds of world-famous guests grace his stage, he had several recurring performers that revisited the set time and time again to offer up their entertaining presentations. Two standout acts that audiences became familiar with were Toppogio, Ed's puppet sidekick, and Signor Wences, the ventriloquist. Stay tuned to learn more about Toppogio. Hey, by the way, did you ever hit like and subscribe to our channel? It literally only takes a second, and it's the best way for you to show us your support. Anyways, Ed was an outspoken advocate for mental health awareness. The 1950s were a time when people seldom talked openly about mental health. Ed Sullivan helped break down some of these walls and inspire healthy discussion of mental health and raise awareness of the fact that mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of or condemned. In 1958, Joshua Logan, the renowned Broadway director of South Pacific fame, sat down with Sullivan and openly discussed his past struggles with mental health and the time he had spent at a mental institution. This normalization of mental health through the lens of the TV screen helped move along major advances in how the world views and treats mental illness, by making it a subject that could be openly discussed without shame or fear. Elvis's debut broke records that still stand today. The world changed on the evening of September 9, 1955, when Elvis Presley took the stage of The Ed Sullivan Show and brought rock and roll music into the mainstream. Over 60 million people watched his performance, and it received an 86.2% share of viewership. That means almost 9 out of 10 people that were watching TV in America were watching The Ed Sullivan Show and Elvis shaking his hips. Ed Sullivan had a widely diverse guest list. It wasn't just music superstars that took the stage on his show. Every kind of entertainer you can imagine paid a visit to the television heavyweights all-star program. Writers, dancers, comedians, circus folk, actors, artists, and you name it all took part in the cultural phenomenon that was The Ed Sullivan Show. The Doors Incident. In 1967, Jim Morrison and the Doors took to Ed's stage to perform their hit song, Light My Fire. The song features the lyric, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," but network bigwigs insisted he tone it down a bit with the words, "Girl, we couldn't get much better." Jim refused to censor his own music and sung the original lyrics, despite the fact they were an obvious reference to drug use. It's no surprise the network had a thing or two to say after he uttered these taboo words on live national television. They were livid, but we're guessing Jim couldn't have cared less. Like the true rebel rock star he was, he not only sung the original lyrics, he did so loudly and in a very exaggerated way to make a point. The band subsequently was banned, no pun intended, from ever appearing on the show again. Ed Sullivan attacked a man at a club. Although Ed would later become known for being a family man and the face of sensibility, in his younger years he still had some fight left in him. Sometime in the 40s, he let his tiff with columnist Walter Winchell get the better of him in the bathroom of the infamous Stock Club. According to Jerry Bowles, Sullivan grabbed a hold of Winchell and forcefully plunged his face into the bottom of the urinal while repeatedly pulling the flush lever. Apparently, all Winchell could do during the assault was make what Bowles described as sobbing noises. Toppogio was Ed's favorite guest. We briefly touched on how Toppogio was a popular recurring guest of the show, but the mouse puppet was, in fact, Ed Sullivan's favorite visitor. The Italian audience thought he was hilarious and a bit of a cultural icon. Many people don't know that Topo got his start in 1961, entitled The Magic World of Toppogio, some 2 years before he found his way onto The Ed Sullivan Show. The Ed Sullivan Theater. The theater and stage that was the original location of The Ed Sullivan Show was honored by being given his name to honor his years of service on television. The Ed Sullivan Theater was the home of The Late Show with David Letterman from 1993 to 2015, and The Late Show with Stephen Colbert is filmed there to this day. It was the longest-running variety show in history. Running from 1948 to 1971 earned The Ed Sullivan Show the honor of being the longest-running variety show in television history. Despite the fact that it clinched the title for decades, it would eventually run out of steam and face the axe of cancellation. After the show was gone, network execs tried out many different shows to capture the magic that was left vacant by the show's time slot, but nothing really ever could compare to what The Ed Sullivan Show did for Sunday evenings. Well, that wraps up our revealing look at The Ed Sullivan Show. What do you think about Ed's love affair with Toppogio, the Italian mouse puppet? There's nothing on TV like that these days for sure. Now it's time to hear from you. It's clear Ed Sullivan helped springboard many artists and musicians' careers straight into the limelight. Who do you think was Ed Sullivan's most significant musical guest, the Beatles or Elvis Presley? Let us know what you think in the comments section. And before you head on out, make sure you hit like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.